what we try to do is get to what we call sellers discretionary earnings, or SDE. So that's the basis for how we start to determine what the value of the company is.
We were doing 3 to 5 Zoom calls every week with potential buyers. I just couldn't believe the amount of interest.
I wanted to create a social network where people, women in particular, could go on and find peer support, Wingwomen, that you can talk to while you are rebounding through a health journey.
We've built a platform that allows early stage businesses to take advantage of the research and development tax credit. It's a credit against that can be claimed against your payroll tax obligations, provides cash funding for your business, and it's a relatively new development.
I'm Richard Gearhart.
And I'm Elizabeth Gearhart.
Stay tuned because the rest of the show is just fantastic. I'm Richard Gearhart, an intellectual property attorney specializing in patents, trademarks, and copyrights.
And I'm Elizabeth Gearhart, not a lawyer, but I work in Gearhart Law, helping with the marketing, and I have my own startup.
That's right. And welcome to Passage to Profit, the show that's all about entrepreneurs, small businesses, and the intellectual property that helps them flourish. Tonight, we have a special treat for you. We have Gene Sower and Paul Volen, who are from Samson Media and Website Closers, respectively, and they're going to be talking about how to sell your business. So after you have a fantastic business, you may decide to sell it, and these guys have been there and done that, and they're going to have lots of great advice for us.
And after that, we have Adonica Shah, who has started an incredible new platform for women. I love the name Wingwomen, so I can hardly wait to hear about that. And then for all you super smart people out there who do research and development and want to pay for it.
This is way above my pay grade, by the way.
Brent Johnson has a program to help you get those tax credits you so desperately need to fund your research.
Any tax credit is a good credit as far as I'm concerned. But before we get to our distinguished guests, we're going to start with Richard's IP in the news. And what are we talking about tonight?
The metaverse, new toys for the metaverse from Facebook.
So does anybody really know what the metaverse is?
We'll find out.
I guess. Well, we're trying to read the tea leaves by reading the patent. So we have one from Facebook here, right? And Mark Zuckerberg has gone from just social media now. He has a special company for developing metaverse gadgets, I guess, right? So it's called Facebook Technologies, which I didn't know existed. And I guess he's in competition with Jeff Bezos now for like the weirdest, wildest stuff, right? So anyway, why don't you tell us a little bit about the patent?
Well, so when you're in the metaverse, I guess you're going to be wearing glasses. We'll all be wearing glasses, but special glasses that have all sorts of sensors and speakers all over them. So you can hear stuff, and there's just a whole lot to it. It has acoustic sensors, speakers, and so it can tell when you're talking, and it can put stuff in your ear through your glasses. It's just.
So the point is that this is like the beginning of the technology associated with the metaverse. It's a little bit like Google Glass, only they don't have the visual screens like Google Glass did.
Probably because Google Glass probably got the patent.
They probably have the patent, so they went full audio. And anyway, I just think it's an interesting topic, getting to see the future a little bit.
They kind of went backwards from what IBM did, because IBM started out as a business machines company, and now it has a whole lot of tech. Facebook started out as tech, and now it's getting into the Internet of Things and consumer products.
Right. So what will they think of next? Who knows?
Who knows?
But before we leave this topic, I'd like to check in with our guests. This is Richard's Roundtable. And does anybody have any comments or questions about intellectual property in general? So, Gene, what are your thoughts here on all of this stuff?
Well, just speaking about the metaverse, about Facebook's metaverse, I think it's really, it's about the Oculus. Isn't the Oculus the whole virtual reality headset that they've really spent a lot of money in? Isn't that really the entryway to the metaverse? And now the glasses it's more of like an augmented reality, so it like superimposes objects on your normal vision. also just, it's a partnership with Ray-Ban, isn't it?
It very well could be. The patent is in the name of Facebook. I don't see any split assinees, which would show like a joint ownership, but it's possible.
company-
Because I've seen
could be.
commercials. I've seen commercials for it, and I thought it was a Ray-Ban, and then it says, metaverse at the bottom.
But
Oh,
these don't have anything, at least in this patent that we're looking at, visually. Everything here is audio sensors.
Hmm.
right. And
And-
it's like a regular pair of glasses.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
So it might be, so there may be another toy that you know about that
Yes,
we didn't
yes.
find when we were looking at
Yes.
this patent.
well, why limit yourselves to one gadget when you can make millions, right?
exactly.
And so in any case, Paul, what are your thoughts on all of this stuff?
Well, with someone like me who works with a lot of small businesses, especially in the digital world, my perspective is always around these new technologies is how is advertising, marketing, especially for small businesses, going to enter that world? Is it there's a way to do it on Facebook that we all know, Instagram, et cetera. But this metaverse and how, especially small digital businesses are going to play in that environment and how they will market themselves, especially in a service standpoint. I can understand product placement, but services like jeans, for example, digital marketing, how is that going? How are they going to present marketing opportunities for small players like that in this world? So I don't know. I haven't, it's just a very curious perspective from my standpoint. I haven't seen anybody really address it yet.
Right. And I think for me personally, the metaverse is still a little bit of a mystery, right? So I think they put it out there to kind of generate some buzz about it, but it's still not, it's obviously a technical journey of some sort that Facebook has in mind. And I like the idea that you're finding the niche in there for small businesses, because they should be able to capitalize on all this stuff too.
Yeah,
right?
Facebook ads are reasonably priced, but I wonder what metaverse ads are gonna cost. Right?
They're going to be meta expensive, aren't
Meta
they?
expensive, right?
So, Brent, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm a relative novice for intellectual property and patents, and I'm a tax credit guy. I'm a tax geek, but I'm always curious about hey, it's clear to me when a new product comes out, the value of obtaining a patent. But as we get into a more digital world and brands and service offerings over that are offered in a SaaS kind of platform, how do you protect those? What kind of intellectual property protection is available? How do you make sure you don't get pirated, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And you can't protect everything, right? It depends a lot on what you're doing. And, the easiest rule of thumb that I go by is if somebody sees it and they can copy it fairly easily, like on a digital platform, and it's protectable because it meets the requirements of patentability, seriously think about intellectual property protection. So, the digital world moves so fast, and sometimes the intellectual property world moves slower. So, there's a balance there between protecting things that are only short-term projects versus something that's maybe more long-term. And if you can keep it a secret at the back end in the software, and it would really take a lot of reverse engineering, that also may not make sense to file intellectual property. But it's very fact specific. You should talk with your intellectual property professional about it, because there's no one blanket right answer. It just depends on what you're doing and what your goals are.
Excellent. So Adonica.
Honestly, I have a couple of questions about it. I echo Brent's sentiment in that I'm not an expert in this area, but I'm wanting to know, I guess just for the group, is this going to be something where Facebook exclusively provides the tools or the toys for the metaverse? Are other companies emerging that can also provide the tools and the toys for the metaverse? Or is this something that Facebook purely has a monopoly on because they know how the metaverse works? And so I'm just wondering if there's going to be other players coming into the metaverse toy space that you're aware of, or if this is something where we're just going to see a series of toys coming out exclusively from Facebook or Meta to be able to access the verse.
Well, if they keep getting patents on everything.
And I love your reference to toys too,
Yeah.
because really,
So that's a good question though. I mean, that's to be seen probably, but they are patenting everything they're coming up with now.
right. And they're going to, it depends on the strategy, right? You have Google on the one hand, which was very open source and opened up their platform to a lot of different developers. And then you have Apple, which really was a very closed system, and they limited a lot of development just to Apple licensees. And even in the beginning, it was only Apple stuff. It's a question of what business strategy you take, and both have been successful. So we just have to wait and see what Facebook does with the metaverse.
Well, they may not let things be compatible unless they give them their blessing, which I imagine that's what they'll do. Will they let other people make stuff? Probably, because
They'll charge them for it. They'll charge a
Yeah.
license fee, I'm sure.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Exactly.
and just because Facebook is making the metaverse doesn't mean that's the only metaverse that can exist. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think didn't Activision have their own metaverse with the World of Warcraft, which was a very popular
Yeah.
game for the
Yeah.
last 5-6 years, and they were actually selling advertising within the game. You could purchase armor, pieces of the costume, whatever it was. So they've already been selling into that. I think it's really going to be a question of competing metaverses at some point. Facebook doesn't, it's not like they own the only, they're putting, they're a first mover or one of the first movers, but it's not going to be exclusive to them.
Wow, let's start our own metaverse right now. Everybody on this
A couple
show,
of billion.
let's
Yeah,
commit
sure.
to
Okay, but
starting
let's
our
ask
own
Ken-
metaverse.
Okay, but let's ask Kenya first. So,
Okay, well,
Kenya,
are you in or are you out?
but she has to give her
Well,
comments.
I'm definitely in. I'm definitely in. And to Jean's point, we at iHeart actually just announced last week that we did a partnership with Roblox. So we are going to be officially in the metaverse by Q3 of this year. That'll all be rolled out. There will be opportunities for advertisers that we work with to get ad space, to be a part of, experiences from all the podcasts to all the live events that we do. So Facebook is definitely not going to be the only player in that space.
Mhm.
Well,
Awesome.
that's good to know. So, your dream, Gene, of competing metaverses seems to be coming true even as we speak.
Yes. So
So if there's competing metaverses, does that mean you have to get toys to access each individual toys or tools to access each individual metaverse?
Think
It's
about Windows, Apple,
Yeah.
yeah.
Beta, VHS. I mean, it's
Yeah.
going to be that kind of
It
thing.
seems
yeah.
very expensive for the consumer.
Well,
Just thinking.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. I want to create a galactiverse, right? That encompasses the whole galaxy. Okay, why stop at the metaverse?
So
There you go.
I think we better move on. Although, I mean, the show wasn't really supposed to be about the metaverse, but let's face it, these people own
This
our
is
lives when they own everything.
What
right?
does metaverse though refer to music, like music verses, like
That-
lots of music
Let's
verses?
move on, shall we?
Okay.
So we would like to interview.
That was a dad joke.
Yeah, interview Jean and Paul. So do you want to introduce our guests?
Yes, we're going to talk to Gene and Paul. And anyway, they're business experts. Gene is an expert at websites, visual media. I've seen some of his work on his website, and it's really amazing stuff. And then Paul is he's from Website Closers, which closers means closing business deals, right? So he's closing business deals on websites. So welcome to the show, guys. This is fantastic. So thanks for coming.
So
Thanks a
Jean,
lot.
I know you wanted to talk about how Paul helped you sell your company, right?
Yes. Yeah, Samson Media, I started it 16 years ago this month, actually. And, we're a small digital agency. It was the kind of thing where, I have anywhere from, at any given time, 15 to 20 clients. And we do social media and email marketing and website development, that kind of thing. And I've never really thought that it was something that I could sell, being that it was just really just a list of clients. I don't have any real estate. I didn't have any equipment. But what I learned very quickly after being introduced to website closers and then connecting with Paul is that the fact that the business was a mature business and it had a track record of profits and earnings, that was really what made it a sellable business, which is what I learned. I had no idea that was like a major criteria for being able to sell your business,
Yeah, and a question that I have, which is so interesting about this, is that so many businesses now are service oriented, and usually the smaller businesses kind of rely on the owner or the creator to sort of be the glue that holds the whole thing together, right? And so if you're selling a business and that owner is no longer there, then what happens to the business, right? And how is that handled?
Well, there were really two types of buyers that were interested in buying Samson Media. One type was a larger agency that was looking to basically absorb the earnings and the income streams into their business, and then be able to disseminate the work amongst their existing staff, and probably get rid of my staff, and probably not have me stay. The other type of business was somebody who was looking to start this type of business and didn't want to start it from scratch, and was looking for a proven process and a team and a methodology and a brand and a reputation and that kind of thing. So that's ultimately who I wound up selling it to. Also, the buyers would ask, they all asked two questions. One was, why am I selling? And am I willing to stay? And why I was selling, I gave the same answer, which was basically, I was just kind of getting tired of it. It was just kind of time to move on. And, they wanted to know if I wanted to stay on. And some were wanting to know if I wanted to stay on because they didn't really want me to stay on. Others were like, they really wanted me to stay on, which is really what I wound up doing and what I wanted, because I'm now a consultant for my own company. So I'm not retired. I just, my daily responsibilities are way different. I'm now no longer dealing with all of the day-to-day client activities, and I can really devote my time to really new business and business development, which is what I do enjoy. And you know how it is when you're, your own business owner, you're constantly getting pulled by so many, different forces around you, where now I'm able to basically, bring in business. I'm still handling probably about 20% of the day-to-day stuff, but being able to hand it off to the team and have them do it. And I tell you, in the first couple of months, I'm CC'd on everything, and I just see things going by, and I'm like, wow, I don't have to do that. I don't have to respond. It's being handled. And, it's really been quite fabulous. So, the person who bought it from me, a guy named Ken, we work very well together, and we kind of complement each other. And he was really looking for another senior person, to sort of bring on to sort of, help him take it to the next level. And I think we're on the right track. So,
well, that is Richard's dream, I think, to be part of it, to have other people. But
I'm never going to give it up. I'm going to die at my desk.
But I wanted to ask Paul. So, Paul, what was your role? How did you facilitate this fabulous deal for Gene? Because this sounds perfect for him. Right?
Sure. Well, so what we do is, we're obviously in Gene's case looking for a buyer, right? We're trying to find the best buyer for his business. And Gene kind of alluded to it, that the exit can take many forms depending on the buyer's desires, right? So we could have a large agency in his space, in this world, that is looking to roll up smaller digital agencies like Gene's. And in that case, they're just leveraging their current workforce and current operations and can absorb that business. There are others that are just looking to make an investment, and they just want to make an investment in a business that they can grow. So that might be some private equity, it might be a family office environment. And that requires then the owner to stay on for a while. So some owners are willing to do that over a longer period of time and then train a new owner that the private equity firm or family office wants to put in that place to grow the business. Or it could be an individual buyer, as it was in Gene's case, where that person just wanted to learn the business, take over as the owner, and then really, up to Gene, how much he wanted to stay involved in the business. And so, it was through conversations with Gene to figure out, okay, what kind of exit do you want so that I can find the best buyer for you? Interestingly, along the way, we actually found a buyer very early. So this process started last February. That's when Gene first reached out to us. By May, and this is, after going through all his taxes and financials and getting the business ready for sale, just 2 months later, we had a buyer. And Gene, after multiple conversations, felt like it just wasn't a good fit. Like he didn't feel confident that this person would carry on, what he's created, his legacy in the future and treat his clients the way he wanted them to be treated. And so he said, Paul, I know they're willing to pay, what I want. I just don't think it's the right fit. So, then we started looking for another buyer for him. And so, it was an iterative process, as Gene was trying to figure out, what do I want to do once I sell this business? How am I still going to make an earning? How am I still going to stay busy? I still have productive years ahead of me, so I don't want to completely get out. So how do we find a buyer that's still willing to work with me, but I can still get my exit? I can still get that check at closing. And so we just went about finding another buyer. And the nice thing about our business, just to toot our own horn, is that we reach over 1 million buyers. And so that's from the single entrepreneur looking to buy his or her own business to, like I said, large $100 million plus investments from venture capital and private equity firms. So across that span, we're likely to find a buyer that's a fit. And sure enough, 2 months later, or actually a month later in June, we found Ken, the other buyer. And it was just a perfect fit. He's a great guy. Gene's a great guy. It was a match made in heaven. And I think, for the last, 4 months now since it's closed, they've been working great together. So yeah, that's how we found the buyer. It was, about finding what was best for Gene and the company moving forward.
That's great. Kenya, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. So when you're putting together the asking price for a business, like what is that appraisal process like? Like what are some of the factors that go into determining how much you're going to sell the business for?
Love it. You're getting direct to the nuts and bolts. That's what every seller wants to know, right? The first conversation I have is usually on their mind. I know it is. It's, what's my business worth? And so the process is a couple of things. First, we look at the health of the business, and that's usually through the income statement, right? The profit and loss statement. So we want to see what's the revenue of business, what are the expenses of the business, how much money is actually going into the owner's pockets. So we know that the tax returns, which we also will look at, don't necessarily show what the health of the business is, because every business owner is trying to reduce taxes as much as possible. I'm sure we'll get to Brent's segment and later that we'll talk more about that. But every business owner wants to present as little profit as possible to the IRS, so they're minimizing their taxes. And so what we have to do is tease that out and say, okay, well, this is what the tax return says, and this is what the company is telling the IRS. But what is the actual cash going into the pocket of the owner? So that might include the officer's salary. It might include expenses that they're using to write off their car. They might be putting entertainment, meals, travel, utilities, home office, medical insurance. All of those things are really to the benefit of the owner and not necessarily a true business expense. We call them discretionary expenses. And so what we try to do is get to what we call sellers discretionary earnings, or SDE. And so those are the earnings that really the owner is putting in their pocket at the end of the year. So that's the basis for how we start to determine what the value of the company is.
And you would add those monies back in to the profitability of the company.
Right.
Right. And Kenya, a short answer to your question is, I got 3.5 times the annual
SDE.
Right. The
Seller's discretionary earnings. Yeah. So,
Oh, wow.
so that's in Gene's case, that was the multiple for his size business, the health of the business. We look at recurring revenue. We look at customer concentration, right? So, does the business have lots of customers, or is it beholden to, a handful of customers that put the business potential future at risk if one of those customers goes away?
There was some considerations about the geography too, right? About not being too New Jersey centric. I sort of de-Jersey the website, because we really really targeted New Jersey, because that was a selling point for us, that we're local, but yeah.
And our buyer pool is national. It's really international. So, in those initial conversations with Gene, I said, hey, let's downplay New Jersey, because a buyer can come from anywhere. Nowadays, these businesses can be operated virtually, and Gene's staff is virtual, right? No, you don't have 12 people going into the same office every day. And so, you can easily envision a new owner managing this business from afar, which indeed is not in New Jersey. And so, the new owner is able to manage it remotely.
So Paul, I have a quick question for you. How many projects do you look at, and which companies do you decide to work with?
So it's interesting there. So a lot of businesses can be sold. So like Gene, said he was surprised that his business was sellable. And Richard, to your original point, like you think of a business, well, I run it. It's all about me. I'm the sole proprietor. How is this ever going to sell to somebody else? And so a lot of sellers will come to us that way and say, how can I sell this? And there are ways, there are paths to get it to a business that can be sold. And so, the percentage is high. So those that come to us and those that we take on are pretty high, because we can usually find an angle where we can make the business sellable. Now, it might take some time. So if, the owner hasn't put policies and procedures in place, standard operating procedures, so that somebody can step in and take over. But we build a path or a plan so that the business and the owner can sell and show to a new buyer, hey, this is how you can replace me. And we'll have a long transition plan so that I can stay in place, so that there's a smooth transition. You don't lose key customers, and you can create that plan that will work. So, let me be direct here. I work in the digital world, right? So website closers is very much about digital businesses. So, e-commerce businesses, digital agencies like Gene's, software businesses, software as a service, SaaS businesses. We do sell some brick and mortar businesses, but the sweet spot for us are those digital businesses that have a national buying audience. And so that probably makes it a little easier to find a buyer, because we know we have a huge universe of buyers. And being a digital business, you can manipulate that into a business that's sellable versus a brick and mortar business that may be built on local relationships, that may be built on local staff. So, that becomes a little more challenging in the brick and mortar world. In our world, we can usually shape it in a way that for most businesses that come to us, we can figure out a way to sell them.
Excellent. So I have a question for Gene. So I think it was probably important for you that the person who bought your business kept it going and growing, right? And didn't just like sit on their rear and do nothing with it and have it fail. So what made you feel comfortable that the person who bought your business was going to really put their heart and soul into it like you did and keep it going?
Well, I think he had a very interesting background. He had an MBA. He's very, very smart. He was very, very tuned into the numbers and the profitability and things that I'm probably more on the creative side. So it's probably things that I've didn't pay as much attention to as I should have. You know how you gravitate toward the things that you like to do and you avoid the things that you don't like to do. So he really made a lot of sense about things, and he was really taking an analytical look at how we could really grow it. And I really liked what he was saying. Also, just to what Paul was saying in terms of the sellability, you know, I really couldn't have done it without their help, with Paul's help, because we packaged the business up. And the thing again that surprised me so much was we were doing 3 to 5 Zoom calls every week with potential buyers. The interest was so enormous. I was just like, really? Like, this is, I just couldn't believe the amount of interest. So, you know, when I turned down that first buyer, it was a couple. I just didn't feel they were right. They kept saying it was an IT company, and I don't know. They weren't talking about it in the right way. And I said, look, it's a marketing company. It's a customer service business. And I couldn't really see them dealing with my clients or my team. So after we put it back out on the market, the calls started right back up. I mean, it was like a flood. If I didn't sell it to Ken, we probably would have sold it to somebody else also. But again, I just had a good vibe. And you know, Paul would do a weekly call every Wednesday. It was me, Paul, and Ken. Me, Paul, and Ken. You know, is he getting the answers? Am I giving him what he needs? You know, are we moving it along? You know, that kind of thing. And you know, you get to kind of know the person a little bit, you know, from those calls. And you know, he wanted the contract, the sale of the business included 30 days of me for the transition. And I actually said, no, I think you really need me for 60 days. So I gave him 60 days of me to help transition. And now, again, I'm on a separate contract, month to month.
So we have time for one more question before we end this, segment. How did the buyer finance the purchase of your business?
Well, I guess I'll have Paul talk about the SBA aspect of this business, but he actually wound up buying it all cash.
Okay. All right.
So it was a very simple thing. I got a check by UPS delivered to my house, all cash, the whole thing.
Paul, when I sell my business, I'm coming to you.
But not everybody has that luck,
better
so
than
don't
cash,
expect
right?
Yeah.
I don't know if we have time, I can give a quick little piece on the SBA because I do think it's important.
Sure.
Okay. So yeah, as Gene said, we actually pre-qualified his business to be SBA eligible. And what that meant is we looked at his tax returns and we cleaned those up, but we looked at his tax returns and then presented that to a business broker that we work with. And they pre-qualified the business for an SBA loan. And a lot of times, and this is just good for business owners to note, is that if you're thinking about selling your business, sometimes you may want to look at your tax return and not necessarily take all of those expenses, because the bank is going to make their decision about the eligibility of a loan for your business when you sell it based on your tax return, not based on all the things that we were manipulating with sellers' discretionary earnings, right? All the funny stuff with the profit and loss and expenses. They're going to look at the tax return. And so Gene actually did a good job of not taking a bunch of crazy expenses every year. And so it showed a higher cash flow. And so because the business showed a higher cash flow, that support of cash flow over what the loan would cost was sufficient enough for a bank to say, hey, I will loan money to somebody that wants to buy his business. And when that happens, a lot of times the buyers can buy a business for as little as 10% down when the SBA is backing the loan. So that's huge, because now you've just opened that buyer pool to a much broader audience that can afford the business when you're looking at 10% versus, in Gene's case, 100%. But if not, a lot of times what you'll have is the seller holding a note themselves.
Right.
So, they say, hey, I'll give you 60% of the business cash at close, but then I want you to hold a seller note for 40% for, say, 5 years. And so that's a more typical outcome if you don't get the SBA pre-qualification.
Sounds good.
Excellent.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, this has been wonderful information. It's the first time we've ever had anybody on the
It's
show.
the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah,
We could
and-
talk about this all day because
Oh,
it's important.
yes.
And so it's
Yeah.
first time we've had somebody on the show who can talk about selling a business. We usually talk about creating a business, but then for people who have done that, this is great information, right?
Absolutely. Entrepreneurs are supposed to sell their businesses and go on to the next thing, right?
Unless they're
Mhm.
so emotionally involved in them that they work until they die. And
In the same.
Well, that's no
in the
fun.
same.
No.
I'm being sarcastic.
I know.
We are at the point of thinking about these things ourselves. So and we have a plan. So anyway, you were listening to Passage to Profit with Richard and Elizabeth Gearhart and our special guests, Gene Sower and Paul Volen. And we'll be right back after this commercial message. Welcome back, everybody, to Passage to Profit with Richard and Elizabeth Gearhart, our special guests, Gene Sower and Paul Volen. And now it's time to move on to Power Move with Kenya Gipson. Kenya, who's our power mover of the week?
So for Power Move this week, we're going to be talking about 50 Cent, who is worth well more than 50 cents. He's actually worth $30 million and is getting richer week by week. He actually launched a new platform where he's going to tap into solving some of hip hop's long unsolved homicides. So I don't know if you remember that show Unsolved Mystery.
Right.
Yeah.
But that was a great show, right?
Mhm.
So he's going to put on his own version of that. He's going to focus on the hip hop community and the unsolved homicides that were never solved, which is going to be very interesting because there's some very notable artists who were unfortunately killed, who we have no idea what happened in those circumstances. So I'm excited to see what he's going to do with this new venture and platform. You know, he was super successful with Power, that series Power that he created. And then now he's on to his next thing. So that's what we were talking about today, creating things, selling them, and then moving on to what's next in our creative careers. So
This sounds really good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love crime,
Yeah.
true crime dramas. You know, I'm hooked on those. So and this is definitely a different cut.
That said, can we move on to Fireside now?
Okay.
So I have a startup called Fireside Directory. It's a video directory for small businesses with incredible cutting edge marketing techniques for the business owners that are on the site. And a real advantage for consumers going to the site because you get a taste of the person you might work with. So anyway, I right now am developing it, and I was really excited to have Paul and Gene on the show today because from the very beginning of this project, I wanted to build it to sell. And Richard has been helping me, and he's like, investors like this, you know, you got to be able to scale it. And so I found a website guy I'm working with who is part of an investment group. And I told him flat out, I said, I want to be able to sell this in now 8 years. And I want it to be investment ready. So I want it to be something investors would look at, even if I don't need the investment money to get it to that point. And so it's really interesting to hear everything Paul says about what you need to do to sell your company.
Are we still even going to be able to see the computer screen in 8 years? I mean,
Well, I'm
how to
hoping
type?
this will transition into the metaverse.
Well, there you go.
There you go.
The first directory in the metaverse. I think we should patent that. So
I did
whatever
write a
that
patent
means.
application on it, which is I'm patent pending on it, and I'm trying to get the trademark. But yeah, I mean, we could explore the metaverse and see how this would fit in there.
I think that's a wonderful suggestion. Just I hope that Mr. Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, is not
Zuckerberg.
He's always a Zuckerberg to me.
CG,
It's
don't feel bad.
All right. All right.
Mark
I'm a good company.
Zuckerberg,
I'm a
if
good
he's
company.
listening, don't take that idea, you know. So All
I
right.
think
Well,
he's got
I think
too
it's
many
time
other
for our guests.
irons in the fire. So I am really excited to hear from Adonica Shaw about her Wingwomen platform. Welcome, Adonica.
Good morning or good afternoon, good evening, good night, whenever you're listening to the segment.
So tell us what you're doing and how you're doing it.
So I am the founder and CEO of Wingwomen. It is essentially a social network that is focused on women's health. And so I know we were talking about Facebook a little earlier, but it would be the difference of everything on Facebook only related to health topics and the ways people manage their health, how they're managing their physical health, mental health, things of that nature. So in my own personal health journey, maybe I guess it's going on 5 years ago now, with the birth of my third child, I experienced a condition called preeclampsia, which disproportionately impacts women of color. I had no idea what it was, but it landed me in the hospital at 34 weeks, and I had to have an emergency delivery within about 24 hours. And so usually with preeclampsia, it is supposed to resolve by having the baby. Unfortunately, in my case, over the next few days, my blood pressure continued to spike and I experienced a code blue in the hospital. So, spoiler alert, I lived. That wasn't evident about where I was going with this.
So you got your street cred. Yeah.
Thank God we knew the story had a
Yeah,
happy ending.
I know. So spoiler alert, I lived. But in the process of rehabilitating my mind, body, spirit in the years following that, it was quite the journey. And it's one that I did primarily by myself, because when you have something that disrupts your health that is either as significant as a code blue, preeclampsia, cancer, any number of diseases or conditions that could seriously disrupt your life, you don't always want to put that burden on other people about what it feels like, what you're going through, because they still want to have a version of you that doesn't require you to only talk about your health or your condition or your sickness and whatnot. And so when I came through that health journey, I was like, I wanted to create a social network where people, women in particular, could go on and find peer support, because I did the process largely alone. And so the idea of Wingwomen is just that. It's having other Wingwomen that you can talk to while you are rebounding through a health journey, talk to, get questions to answers, how they manage things, check in on people. And then in addition to the peer support component, we have a directory. So most of us know when you go to the doctor's office, you get like 15 minutes with a healthcare provider. And so I think right now in particular, more than ever, people want that old school, like being able to build a rapport with your doctor or physician, healthcare worker, patient advocate. I myself am also a patient advocate at this point, but it can be really hard to do that. And so I wanted to build something, like I said, where they can build those valuable relationships and connections and then foster their health outside of the burden of putting it on their family members.
Wow, that is such an insightful thought, and I think what you're doing is absolutely great. Do you sort of have it organized by? Is it just anybody can talk about any kind of medical issue, or do you have it organized so that people who have had similar medical issues might be, more empathetic? How is the site set up?
Well, for now, our focus is on women's reproductive health and physical and mental health as it relates to the prenatal, pregnancy, and postpartum periods. On my advisory board, I've got some really amazing people, one of which is Dr. Linda Bradley. She's with the Cleveland Clinic, and just phenomenal work. She's a former president of ACOG and I believe a board member for ACOG right now. So just given their expertise as OBGYNs, her and Dr. Pari Godse, and I have two mental health experts on my advisory board, we felt that our strongest go-to-market and in-market positioning was around women's reproductive health. And then myself as the founder, having my own personal story and journey, I think speaks to the necessity. I mean, obviously outside of all of the statistics that are out there, about why we are positioned the way we are right now.
Well, I think it's excellent. And I think the focus on that is really important because, there's the old kind of thought with a lot of people, oh, a woman has a baby, she gets on the horse the next day.
No.
It's like, right? And you're
That's
like,
not how
there's
it
no
works,
way I
huh?
was riding a horse after having my baby. But I think people just
Especially
so,
the horse. I
Yeah.
mean,
and people just so take it for granted, and all sorts of things happen, and people don't talk about it because nobody's like, they're like, well, you had a baby, everybody does it every day. But to have
Yeah.
a group you can go to, I think is super important. But I can tell Kenya wants to say something too.
Well, I just think it's wonderful because I feel, especially at a time where I think everyone, whether you're a man or a woman, has felt secluded because of everything that's going on with the pandemic, that this is very timely. And that if you are experiencing some sort of health issue, that you do have a community that you can go connect to and feel part of something. So I think that it's a very brilliant idea. What is the experience like? So when somebody joins it, like, what are the expectations? Like, what happens?
Expectations are, they obviously have to treat everybody on the platform with respect, but they essentially have access to it very similar to other social networks. There's a main timeline, you have a profile, you can search through other users. I would say one of the things that makes this exceptional or unique, and it's something that I'm still determining legalities around, just in case anybody is about to follow up immediately after this interview, is that it has a text crisis line. And so I think all of us can attest to the fact that when you've been on Facebook, you've seen something that's alarming, disturbing, and just kind of strikes you in a way that's not always helpful. And so particularly when you're talking about your own healthcare journey, it can be really emotional, right? And so the other part of that experience for the user is that if they just need somebody to talk to, there's a text button within the platform, and we just text. We don't offer medical advice, but again, if you just need somebody to talk to about whatever's going on, that allows the user to not only engage with other users, but if they need personalized care without needing to go into a doctor's office and they just need somebody to talk to, it's something that's available to them. And the great thing about the text crisis line is that it's HIPAA compliant. And so any information, pictures, content that is exchanged back and forth from the user to us is encrypted. And so it stays within network, which I think is a big difference, because right now a lot of these conversations are already happening, but they're happening in Facebook groups.
Yes.
And, I don't necessarily need my neighbor 3 doors down to know what my mammogram results were. Right. And so keeping it enclosed in its own network. And if you're sharing pictures and all of that, you're not putting it in a position to be widely shared across social media because everything stays in our network. There's no buttons to share out. So once you remember, that you're only talking to users that are also in that same user experience. It's not like cross promoting, oh, here's the picture of my colonoscopy. It's not going to be shared across social media and disrupt your professional life 3 weeks later. And so,
Well, I love your text function because I know like postpartum depression is a thing too. And I could see a huge need, but I think Jean wanted to say something.
Yes, I was just curious. Just curious, Adonica, what's the business model?
So
how is it funded?
It's an ad-driven company. So advertisers are essentially healthcare systems, health insurance companies, patient advocates, health coaches, people that would essentially be willing or would want to work with any of the patients that are on platform. And so it's a unique buy-in, but
you have an ad sales team?
No, but it's interesting you bring that up. Right now, and I believe yesterday they just made the announcement, our company was accepted into the NASDAQ United Nations Milestone Makers Program. And so our milestone under the guidance of NASDAQ or the Entrepreneurial Center there was to launch our ad structure. And so that's coming next month. And so I will
Oh.
be looking to find different people to work with us to grow that in the coming months. But it's a tremendous time for us because I think initially we were going to go after a marketplace model and it just didn't suit what we were building. So,
And to be a member, there's no charge to be a member of it? It's a free,
No.
okay.
no, for the user, it's completely free,
Right.
but for the advertisers, healthcare providers, advertisers, if you will, there's two different tiers that they can pay for. And so based off of whatever their monthly or annual fee is, they have more ability to engage with users. So for the lowest tier, you can build your own group. You can use your profile to message different users. You can engage with people in the different forums. But for the higher tier, if you want to be in an email blast, be included in our events, be listed as an annual advertiser, it's obviously a higher rate. And so
Right.
just between the two tiers, depends on how much engagement they get directly with the patient population.
This is
Okay.
excellent. Unfortunately, we're out of time for this segment, but this sounds like a great platform going forward. How do people find it?
We're online at www.mywingwomen.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Adonica. So listeners, don't go away. We have another really great presentation coming up after the break. And if you missed any of this, our podcast comes out tomorrow. But for now, you are listening to Richard and Elizabeth Gearhart on Passage to Profit on WOR 710, the Voice of New York. And we'll be right back. Welcome back, listeners, to Passage to Profit with Richard and Elizabeth Gearhart. And our special guests today, Brent Sower and Paul Volen. And we just heard from Adonica Shaw, a wonderful thing she's doing. But now we get to talk to Brent Johnson. And it's, you know, all about getting money for your research, which is very cool to a lot of people. So Brent, please tell us what you've done.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for having me today. Yeah, we've built a platform that allows early stage businesses to take advantage of the research and development tax credit. It's a credit against that can be claimed against your payroll tax obligations, provides cash funding for your business, and it's a relatively new development.
That's great. So I located in New Jersey, we also oftentimes advise clients to take advantage of the New Jersey tax credit. But as I understand it now, you're saying there's also a federal tax credit for research and development for smaller companies.
Yeah, it's a federal credit that's, like I said, claimed against your payroll tax obligations at the federal level. But, you know, it's a program that's been around for pushing 50 years, but
Wow.
historically was only available to large corporate taxpayers. So think ExxonMobil or General Electric, companies like that invested heavily in manufacturing processes, new technology, et cetera, and had a corporate income tax obligation. Much of the research and development, of course, it's done in the United States, is done by early stage tech businesses that are pre-profitability. They don't have income tax obligations. And so there really wasn't a way for these businesses to turn that credit into cash. So they were eligible for it, but they couldn't monetize it. So it wasn't helpful for them. And so that changed just about 5 years ago with some new rules that came out of the PATH Act, the Protecting Americans from Tax Hikes Act, that allow early stage businesses for their first 5 years, if they're under $5 million in revenue, to claim the credit against their payroll tax obligations. So now they have a way to turn that credit into cash.
Right. And so the basis of the credit system, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way it works in New Jersey is that there's a market for these tax credits, right? And so the larger companies who are looking for tax credit can sort of buy the R&D expenses from smaller companies and use that to reduce their taxes, and then the smaller company gets the cash. Is that also the way the federal tax
It
program
doesn't
works?
work that way on the research and development tax credit. There are some niche markets in tax credits. There's tax credits for a number of different business activities, generally centered around increases in employment, capital investment, developing new products, et cetera. Can be at the federal or state level. You see more sales of tax credits, as you're describing, Richard, at the state level.
Right.
In some of the really more niche programs. The research and development federal credit is, of course, across the country. There's really not a market to sell the credits.
I see.
And so you have to be able to monetize them through, you have to have a tax obligation to offset. And so as I referenced earlier, when it was only available against the income tax obligations, that wasn't really helpful for startups. There was no way to turn them into cash, and there was no market to sell them in. And
Right.
so that you really didn't have much in the way of participation in early stage businesses. Now that these businesses are allowed to claim the credit against their payroll tax obligation, virtually all early stage businesses have payroll tax obligations. If they have employees, they have a way to actually turn that credit into cash without selling it on a market, as you described.
So Brent, how does your system actually work? It says a combination of software and experts. So
yeah, it's very much like TurboTax. So if you think about if you don't go to a CPA firm or a tax preparer to have your tax return prepared, you might buy TurboTax, and it's self-guided. You go through the process of compiling the necessary documentation to claim the credit. And there's expert services on the back end that provide a review of what you've done and are available to answer questions as you go through the process. So it's very TurboTax-like.
okay, excellent. So I want to make sure we have time for a lot of questions. So Jean, did you have a question?
Well, the program, so you say it's like a TurboTax program. So are they CPAs that answer the questions?
Yes,
Okay.
some CPAs and some attorneys, but yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah, we have an
Sean?
expert team that backs it all.
Okay. So when you say payroll taxes, then what are the typical payroll taxes that an employer is charged, and what of those taxes can the tax credit be applied to?
So it's applied to the FICA tax obligation. So if your business has, say, $1 million in payroll, there'll be 6.2% of that is paid by the employees and withheld from their paycheck, and then 6.2% of that will be paid directly by the company. And it's that company portion of the FICA tax that this credit can offset.
So great. Kenya, did you have a question?
I do. So in terms of industries that this will be applicable to, is it only certain industries, or is it like how would it work depending on what kind of business you have?
Yeah, so it really is applicable if you're developing a new product or service offering that's based on one of the hard sciences. So technology development is very big, of course. Pharmaceutical development, manufacturing, small manufacturers that improve their processes, the engineering work that goes into improving those processes. Really, any business that employs or contracts with engineers that are developing new products or services.
Okay, that's great.
Would it apply to software development?
Yes. So software development is, if you're developing, canned software, you can't, just buy canned software and plug it in and claim credit for that. But developing that software, the costs of developing that software are eligible for the credit. The credit works out to be about 10% of what it costs you to develop a new product or service. And it comes back in the form of cash through these tax credits.
Excellent. Paul, do you have a question or comment?
More just around clarity of this. So if you're developing software, it has to be a product that is sold in the marketplace, or can it be just used for internal development purposes?
So there's a stricter set of rules if it's purely internal use. So there's, in software, you have three basic buckets. You have, software that's developed for sale to third parties. There's SaaS platforms, so software as a service, where you don't actually buy the software, but you utilize the software. And then there's software that you develop for your own internal use. And the rules are a little murky around internal use software. There's actually a fair amount of case law out there, but some regulations came out about 5 or 6 years ago, which gives greater clarity that it says, hey, if you've developed that software and it facilitates interactions with third parties, it can still qualify as creditable spend.
Yeah, I'm writing this down because we have a number of internal software development projects, and where can we find the regulations related to that? It's in the tax code somewhere, right?
I mean, if you want Treasury regulation,
you can just send it to me in an email. All right.
So how do people find you if they want to buy this software and use it to get 10%? That's a lot. Get that back. Where do they find you?
Yeah, it's at www.clarusrd.com.
Okay.
And what is your business model for your project?
Yeah, so our charges are contingent. So they are usually 15% of the tax credit that we obtain for people through this process. So there's no charge if you don't obtain tax credit, and that pricing can scale depending on how large a tax credit you get.
Right.
So since you started this, have you seen an uptick in people using this tax credit? You said they weren't really using it before.
Yeah, you've seen a pretty dramatic increase in number of claimants over the last 5 years since they've changed these rules. And now you see some of the major payroll platforms looking for solutions to roll out to their customers, so that they can make sure that these credits are properly documented. This is an area that is ripe for fraud. There's really not a lot to keep you from just claiming the credit without doing the proper documentation. Absent the payroll companies just saying, no, you haven't submitted sufficient documentation to determine eligibility. And so there's seen a really significant increase in number of claimants over the last 5 years.
So if you're a company and you're working with a vendor and you have an internal IT person, and then you are also working with a vendor, are the payments to assuming that the project qualifies, are the payments to the vendor also calculated as part of the credit, or is it only the internal costs?
Internal and external spend counts. External spend with consultants is haircutted by 35%. So you get to claim 65% of the cost of external consultants. And the general concept there is they assume that that labor has been marked up, of course. And so there's a bit of a haircut in the process, but the spend is eligible.
So Brent, are you planning to sell this company? I'm just curious. Paul's
already looking.
Yeah, Paul's like, come talk to me. But are you building it to sell, or do you hope to keep it for a while?
Yeah, we raised capital to start the company because we did develop software in order to be able to take this, what really was a traditional model executed in Big Four firms where they sent out experts and did interviews, et cetera, to compile the required documentation. We built software around that, and that of course cost a fair amount of money to do up front. And so
we're sure you took the tax credit for that.
And we did, of course. Yep. We took our own tax credit. But yeah, so we raised money, and eventually the company will likely change hands.
Right, because the investors want an exit. That's when they get their money back.
Sure.
Right? Yeah.
Absolutely. So
are we wrapping up this segment?
I think we're just on time, so maybe it's time to.
So this was the perfect show for you to be on, Brent, because you met Paul.
Yeah, perfect.
And it will also air before April 15th.
Yes.
So there's always that possibility too.
So we have to wrap up this segment, but don't go away because we're not quite done yet. But this has been an awesome show. And you are listening to Passage to Profit with Rich and Elizabeth Gearhart on WOR 710. And we will be right back.
Welcome back, everybody, to Passage to Profit. It was an awesome show. I think it was just fantastic. And, you know, on the one hand, we had the hard business piece, and then on the other hand, we had the empathetic piece, right? So we were kind of yin and yang this evening.
Can't do one without the other. So we had on our show, we had Gene Sower and Paul Volen. And Gene recently sold his company with the help of Paul, but Gene is still working in his company. It's digital marketing. And, you know, I had Richard look at some of the work that Gene has done that's in his portfolio on his website. And Richard was pretty impressed, I gotta say.
Yeah.
So that is samsonmedia.net. And you can find Gene Sower, Sower, on LinkedIn. And then,
so if you're an entrepreneur, there's light at the end of the tunnel. You don't have to be entrepreneurial forever. There is a solution.
So Paul had some really good insights. Well, Paul does this for a living. He helps people sell their companies. He had some really good insights on the show. So if you missed it, you should go back and listen to him. But if you're interested in selling your company or finding out more from Paul, you can contact him at websiteclosers.com. And Paul Volen is also on LinkedIn. So I particularly found that very interesting. And then we had Adonica Shaw, and her website is mywingwomen.com. And I think what she's doing is incredibly important. She has a platform and a site for women who are going through reproductive issues or, you know, just things in their lives, to get together and talk to each other about things they wouldn't really feel comfortable talking to people who wouldn't understand about it.
Right. And, you know, that includes men, because we are notoriously unable to empathize, and finding other people who've been through what you've been through and being able to talk about it is really, I think that's just a first class approach.
I think it's excellent. And then Brent Johnson with Clarus RD, CLARUSRD.com. And this is really super important too, because it's helping the people that are driving innovation by creating new things and doing research and development get money to do it by getting this tax credit.
The wheels in my head are already spinning on this one.
Right,
So I'm sure a lot of our clients would love to hear about this. And I'm not sure that they get this advice from their tax accountant normally. So
and as always, we had Kenya Gipson with iHeartMedia. She is our media maven. So her name is spelled Kenya Gipson with a P, and it's Kenya Gipson at iHeartMedia.com. And as I've said many times, she was the genius that dreamt up this show.
She's looking especially mavenish today,
yes,
isn't she?
Looks very much like a maven. And but she has just excellent marketing ideas. And anytime I need a new idea, I go to Kenya. She's fabulous. She's amazing. So if you have questions about being on the radio, doing some advertising, talk to Kenya, email her, kenyagipson at iHeartMedia.com.
And we'd like to do a shout out to our audience. Thank you very much for listening to us. But before we go, we need some final thoughts. Paul, why don't you share some final thoughts with us?
I would say for all the entrepreneurs out there, sell on the way up. Most sellers, most owners wait too long, and they miss the opportunity when the business is growing, and that's what buyers want to see. They want to see a growing business, and so there are ways for you to get out of it, to exit it, and not wait too long. You can do like Gene did and smoothly transition into a semi-retirement. So don't wait too long. Sell on the way up.
We love that. Gene, what are your thoughts?
Well, I know your audience is primarily entrepreneurs, so I really have two bits of advice. One is, do it sooner than later if you're thinking about starting a business. There's never going to be the perfect time where the opportunity is going to arrive on your doorstep, gift wrapped, and everything is perfectly aligned. Because one of my regrets in starting the business is that I hadn't started it sooner. The other thing is, in terms of when you're strategizing starting your business, I would say ask for help from other entrepreneurs. While it's totally fine to ask your spouse or your people that are around you, I think entrepreneurs are really a special breed. And there's a lot of people who aren't entrepreneurs don't really understand, and they're probably more cautious, and they may think, oh, this is a crazy idea. And I think getting some input from other entrepreneurs is really very valuable. And when you ask for help, people like to give help. So.
Wow, that's great advice too. And thank you for helping our entrepreneurs. And we totally appreciate that. Kenya?
Yeah, I would say that today's show had all the pieces to the entrepreneurial puzzle, right? Creating a business, starting a platform, building a platform, applying the proper tax credits, and then selling. Have the
Right?
Right. Beginning to end.
All the things.
You're always good at putting it together, Kenya.
Thank you,
Cradle to
Kenya.
grave.
Truly mavenish. So thank you very much. So that's about it for us. We'll be back next week with another amazing episode of Passage to Profit, if we do say so ourselves. But before we go, I'd like to thank all the people that make the show possible. Noah Fleischman, our producer, Alicia Morrissey, our program coordinator, Chatterboss, our video editor, and the whole iHeart team. You're listening to Passage to Profit on iHeart Radio, WOR 710, the voice of New York. That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.